So for me, it's a couple of weeks and a full COVID infection later. For you, it's like a week. I wasn't planning on making an epilogue so soon, but while I was working on these videos, I accidentally completed a side project that has to do with magic squares. So here we are. Hello there, I'm Simon, welcome to my channel, and welcome back to Magic Squares and Me, the series where I tell you pretty much everything I know about magic squares. In this epilogue I want to talk about this. This is a thing I developed called a magic Rubik's Cube. The term feels a little like a tautology because Rubik's Cubes were originally called magic cubes. But in this case it actually refers to the combination of the concept of a Rubik's Cube with the concept of magic squares, which is why it's in this series. It makes sense. But before I go into it, I should mention that I'm not the first to do something like this. I actually mailed Matt Parker with this idea, and he said that James Grime, from Singing Banana fame, has actually designed a Rubik's Cube that tries to combine the cube with the idea of magic squares. Because of course he did. I'll leave a link below to an article by Katie Steckles, because apparently I'm name dropping every math YouTuber. Anyway, I'm not gonna go into the Grime Cube, because if I'm honest, I don't fully understand what it's about. The Grime Cube is just trying to do something completely different than what I'm trying to do here. So the link is below, go read it. Now let's talk about my design. So what is actually happening here? Essentially it's the concept of a magic square applied onto a three-dimensional cube. So on this cube there are 54 different numbers distributed in such a way that the sum of all the numbers in each ring going all around the cube always add up to the same magic sum. Now that in itself is easy enough to do, but I'll talk about that in a moment. But there is something that makes this a little more complex, but also much more magical. Because a Rubik's Cube isn't just a static cube, is it? A Rubik's Cube moves. So I started wondering if it might be possible to somehow arrange the numbers in such a way that it doesn't just have that magical uniformity in the sum of each of the rings, but so that that uniformity could be retained as the cube is being shuffled. I mean, that would be the holy grail of mathematical objects. But is it even possible? Turns out it's not. But of course, just saying that it's impossible just won't do. So let's prove it. Because if I don't, what's the point? Now, the way I'm gonna prove that this is impossible is actually very similar to the way we used for the 2x2 magic square, which is basically assuming that it works as it's supposed to and then try to break it. With something as complex as this, the best way to disprove it is to assume a general setup that abides by all the rules we set forth, and then prove that that will inevitably lead to something that will contradict those same rules. So here's how I did it. So imagine that this Rubik's Cube is filled with 54 letters or something, placeholders if you will, that represent 54 different numbers. It doesn't actually matter what the numbers are, just that they represent a layout of numbers that abides by all the rules we set forth. So now, all we have to do is prove that there is at least one situation where this will inevitably break for at least one isolated case. Let's look at one specific ring. And actually, we'll only look at this one specific corner piece. If this can break the rules, then it's all over. So in this ring, all the numbers add up to a specific sum. I don't know what that sum is, nor does it matter. The point is that it's a specific sum. And this is important, that it will be the same sum, not only for each ring, but also for each iteration. So with every shuffled position, the sum is going to be the same between those shuffles, because they're the same numbers, right? There's no way to arrange the same collection of numbers differently to suddenly make them give a different sum. As I was saying, all the numbers in this ring add up to a specific sum. And that sum has to be the same after a shuffle. Now here's what I'm gonna do. To keep this as simple and as scientific as I can, I'm gonna limit the amount of factors involved. I'm gonna do that by making just one little change. And that is, I'm gonna turn this one piece just 120 degrees. Now, I've just done it, so it's obvious that this is in fact definitely possible. So what did that do for our sum? Remember, it has to be the same sum as it was before. Well, that move did a bunch of stuff down here, but we don't actually care about any of that, because none of that influences what's happening up here, in the one ring we're looking at. And in that ring, pretty much everything is the same. In fact, the only thing that has changed is the orientation of this one corner piece. Now, a corner piece like this has 3 numbers on it, 2 of which are in this ring. Now, with 3 numbers, there's only so many ways to make pairs, and so any 2 pairs you make will always have 1 number in common. All that to say that because I turned that piece, there is now a new pair of numbers, but one of its numbers was already in the previous pair. That means that in the big collection of numbers that make up the sum in this ring, only 1 number is different. Between the previous iteration and this one, there's only 1 number that has been replaced and 1 that replaced it, and everything else is the same. The thing is that because that magic sum always has to be the same between iterations, and between those iterations only that number is different, that logically and mathematically means that those 2 numbers would have to be the exact same number. In fact, I think, but I didn't actually try it, that it's probably possible to prove that every single one of those 54 numbers would have to be the same for this to work. In any case, at least those 2 have to be the same. And that goes against the rule that says that every number has to be different. Otherwise, it just takes away a lot of the magic. So yeah, a magic Rubik's Cube, as described, is simply mathematically impossible. So what the bleep is this then? Well, this is the next best thing. This is a Rubik's Cube laid out with 54 different numbers in such a way that the sum of all the numbers for each ring all around the cube is always the same. Now, this doesn't have enough of that magical integrity to keep the same sum throughout shuffles, because as I've just proven, that's impossible. It does have as much magical integrity as I could give it, meaning that while you may not be able to completely shuffle it, you can do this. In fact, you can also do this without breaking that integrity. These numbers are laid out in such a way that you can rotate any of the sides as much as you want, as long as the sides you rotate don't cut into each other. As long as that condition is fulfilled, the magical integrity of the sums of each ring is retained. And that's pretty darn magical if you ask me. But how does it work? It's actually pretty simple. This is really just the picture principle again. If you remember, the picture principle works by making a magic square out of magic squares. So for the magic Rubik's Cube, I used the classic low shoe magic square, the basic 3x3 magic square, for the small picture. And for the big picture, I used a dice. Fun fact about dice is that the numbers are laid out so that every pair of opposite numbers always adds up to 7. Which means that the sums of each ring all around the cube is always the same. So by combining a dice with the low shoe square, we can make a 3-dimensional magic square. But it's still quite static. So how to make it retain as much of that magical integrity as possible? Well, by doing pretty much the same as what's happening on a dice. All we need to do is adjust the orientation and mirroring of the small pictures in such a way that all pairs of opposite numbers add up to the same number. What that does is this. What actually changed here? Well, the top and bottom are still the same magic squares, so that still works. And these sides are now broken up. But the numbers that were replaced have been replaced by another pair of numbers that together add up to the same, meaning that the magic is preserved. I think that's about all I can say about it. I don't think I need to go too deep into the practical making of the cube. Obviously all it is an old Rubik's Cube, a bunch of white stickers and some markers. You'll notice that there's these colored edges around the tiles. Now obviously those are completely obsolete for the mathematical properties of the cube, but they do serve a purpose. because while I don't want this cube to be shuffled, it's still possible. So if it ever were to end up being shuffled, these colors are there to allow me to easily put it back in the solved magical state. But that's really all there is to say about this. Time to wrap up and do the YouTube thing. You know the drill, it's all in the end screen right here. If you don't know what to comment, how about this? What did you think of the series? Would you be interested in more mathy topics like this? Or should I just get back to the history stuff? And of course there's the fandom stuff and the D&D stuff to talk about. If so, don't worry, I've got some good stuff coming up. But that will do for now. Thanks for watching.